Hello everyone and welcome to the first video on operations, the fourth unit in our syllabus and one of the main functions of any business setting up. Now before we get into the nitty gritty of what the operations department is supposed to do, I just wanted to give you guys an overview as to what operations is all about and where exactly their work lies within a business. And we'll start off by looking at our happy customer here. Remember, this is one of the main objectives of any business, making the customers happy, providing to them what they expect from a product. Now, that product obviously starts off with an idea. Some shape, some form, some color you will have to figure out, and that's something the marketing department helps you to identify, coming up with the idea of what the product should look like. And between that idea and the satisfaction of the customer is where the operations department lies. Now, operations is just another name for the production side of a business. So what operations does is they're in charge of making the product. Of course, there's two sides to it. One, you have an idea of what it needs to be, and also you need to figure out what the customers expect from it. And having all of that in your product is what operations is all about. So a product, as you know, can take two forms. Could be a good or it could be a service. And making sure that the service or good is meeting the exact specifications of what the customers expect is the job of the operations department. So they definitely get a lot of help from the marketing department in terms of what the product should look like and what the customers expect. But bringing that to reality in a product that is usable, which is feasible, and which is something the customers want is what the operations department does, the production side of things, the manufacturing. Okay. Now, at this point, I will remind you of the very first video we did together of Unit 1, where we figured out what defines a business. And the second step of the definition of a business was that they buy factors of production, otherwise known as resources. Then they combine them in the next step to convert it into some sort of a good or service. So operations deals with two sides. One, figuring out what are the different resources that we're going to need. So the land, labor, capital side of the equation. And then as a result, what type of good or product would they be producing after putting it through the whole manufacturing process. So connecting those two sides, the utility and then the efficient utility of resources, equating that to maximizing your output is what operations' objectives revolve around. So if I wanted to sum up what the operations department is tasked with doing, it would come down to these 6 things. It starts off with identifying the resources that you need. Now remember, in order to produce things, you need a place to produce on land, you will need people, and you'll need machines. So a combination of land, labor, and capital would be needed, and determining how much of each is required is the responsibility of the operations department. Then it can't just be a shot in the dark. You've got to strategize. How many products do we need to make? How many varieties? Are we selling locally? Are we selling internationally? So you have to know exactly what variants and what level of production you need. And the idea is to convert a bunch of inputs, which your resources are, and turn them into some sort of an output in the form of a good or a service. Now, this is where the marketing department plays a huge role in helping the operations department, because the requirements for making this output all come from the marketing department. In the sense that the marketing will give them a sales forecast, which tells them the amount of output they need to produce, and they will also tell them the variety that the consumers expect the product in. So this is where marketing is like best friends with operations. They give them all the requirements, which then the operations department will convert into a product. Now, throughout this whole thing, you got to plan it out. You can't have any wastage of resources. You got to make sure that your raw materials are being delivered on time. Your land is ready. Your workers have been trained and they are equipped, and all the machines are in place for you to start your production. Because if, for example, let's say your raw materials are delayed, that means the land's not being used. You're already paying for it in terms of rent. The workers are not being used. You're also paying them salaries, and the machinery is not being used, and you're already spending money on maintaining them, or simply you may have taken a loan to get the machine, so you're paying an interest. So you got to plan to make sure that all the resources in the right proportion are ready, so that you're not wasting any of it. And finally, it can't just be something that's left for others to do. You need to look constantly oversee the process, make sure that you're meeting the target, to making any corrections to the quality of the product or making new variants as the new demand arises from the consumers. So as long as these things are being managed by the operations department, they will be in line with the overall corporate objective of the company. So as we just saw, that the first three tasks of the operations department is to allocate resources, strategize how you're going to mix them up, and then convert those inputs or resources into a bunch of outputs in the form of goods and services. And that's what we call the transformation process, and that's what we're going to look at right now. So the first phase is getting all the resources in at the right time. So that would include your raw materials. So if you're making furnitures, for example, you need wood. So getting that in on time, getting all the equipment in place that you need to make and convert that into furniture. And you'll also need labor, skilled labor that can convert a piece of wood into a table. So that's the first stage, getting all the inputs in. And that's what we see here. The inputs go in. And then they go through a transformation process, which means they change shape and they're converted into some sort of a good or a service. And since we are a furniture maker, you convert those resources into either a couch or a table or whatever you're making. So this whole process is what operations is really responsible for, and this is the promise to the customer, the product that you're selling. So it's a crucial part of the business, and making sure that this is being done efficiently is very important. Now, what does efficiency mean? Efficiency means use less, make more. So if you can get your workers to be more skilled, they'll be able to make more output. That's good for you. If you can get an equipment that can make you things faster, that's efficient. You make more couches, that's good for you. If you can get your raw materials in at a cheaper rate and still make the same output, you're being efficient. So that's where the essence of the transformation process lies, is making sure that the combination is being done in such a way that you're producing the most efficient level of output, and all along you are adding value to the final product, making it more desirable for the customers. Now, we have been discussing the transformation process so far through the example of manufacturing so far, which would imply that this only qualifies for secondary sector businesses that are involved in manufacturing. But that's not true at all. Transformation process can be done by businesses in the primary sector, businesses in the secondary sector, and businesses in the tertiary sector. So what transformation process is, what we understand so far, it's definitely manufacturing, right? Converting wood into table. That's also a form of transformation process. Another form of transformation process is simply supplying a good. So your local water supplier would put in the pipelines and all that, making sure that the water is coming through the taps in your homes. That is also part of transformation process. They're not making the water, they're simply supplying it to you. Likewise, simply supplying or transporting things from one place to another is also a form of transformation process. So your UPS, your FedEx, your TCS, all these courier companies that take products from point A to point B are also performing a transformation process. And finally, any service that you provide. So when you get your food delivered by Food Panda, they're also part of the transformation process. A business, a restaurant in this case, converted the raw materials into a product, but then it also needs to be delivered to their homes. And that service, that delivery service, will also be considered as the transformation process. So anything that converts the product into the raw materials into goods and services and gets it into the hands of the customers is what we know as the transformation process. Now, here's a concept that we will be seeing for the first time in our syllabus, but it's made out of other things that we already are aware of. This is called intellectual capital. And intellectual capital is basically the combination of all the human effort that people put in. So when you talk about human effort, it's coming from skilled people. So all the well-trained people and their skills and their knowledge is one part of intellectual capital. So in terms of schools, you have teachers who have certain skills, which is why they teach. In addition to that, a school or any business would also have some IT systems which will allow them to have certain databases or contain some information which will give them an advantage as to how the consumers are behaving. So that's another part of it. Plus, they will also have good relations internally and externally with certain customers and certain suppliers. So, having good links with suppliers and customers is another asset for a business. And when you combine the three together, so when you have the skills of your human capital, when you have the knowledge and database of your information systems, and when you have the good relations with customers and suppliers, all these things add up to form what we call intellectual capital. So, if I wanted to define what intellectual capital is, it would look something like this. It's the end result of combining your human capital, your IT systems, and your relationship with stakeholders. And when you combine the three together, you end up having an advantage, an edge that no one else has because you have those employees, you have that information, and you have those relationships. And by combining this, it may give you something extra that you can apply to your business and make your business that much better. So, how some schools are better is because they have better teachers, they have better curriculums, and they have good relationship with the customers and suppliers. And that extra bit of edge given to the workers and made part of the production process will always make the business shine a little brighter. So, intellectual capital, it's an intangible property for a business, and it's a combination of all the other resources being combined to form something new, a little edge being given to the business.